In October 1990, Pastor Larry Neville sent a letter to Pastor Mitchell and the elders of Christian Fellowship Ministries. This episode examines that letter. It's important for two reasons. First, Neville was a pastor, and he was there from the beginning. An article by Charisma magazine reported he worked with Wayman Mitchell from 1978 to 1991 and had planted churches extensively in Asia. Second, the concerns in this letter, control, enforced separation, pressure on relationships, and structural rigidity, overlap with the criticisms that surfaced again in later reporting about the fellowship.
He's a Jewish crusader. He's anti-Christian Jewish crusader. That's what Mr. Ross is.
People are held in captive. They're held in fear.
To watch Greg Mitchell weave his so-called magic.
Worldwide franchise of Potter's Houses and Victory Chapels. Wayman Mitchell is founder and chairman of the board.
Welcome to episode 4.1 of the Potter's House Cult YouTube channel. This episode begins a new series, Letters to the Church. The purpose of the series is to go through contemporaneous documents, letters, statements, and internal material that show what pastors were saying at the time events were unfolding. This first episode focuses on a 1990 letter from Larry Neville. An article published on cult expert Rick Ross's website reproduces later reporting that identifies Neville as a missionary who planted dozens of Potter's House churches in Asia and says he worked with Mitchell until 1991. Separate public biographical material also credits him with pioneering churches in Arizona, Pennsylvania, the Philippines, and Singapore, and lists several books written by him, among which a book he wrote when he was still in the fellowship, titled The National Church in a Nationalistic Age. I have not read that book, so I am not using it as evidence in this episode. I am mentioning it only as part of his public record. I am now going to read Neville's letter in full, without interruption. After that, I will identify its main claims and explain why this document is relevant to the wider discussion about authority, control, and separation in the Potter's House. To Pastor Mitchell and the elders. October 1990. For almost a year now, I have agonized in my spirit over the divisions in the fellowship. Being in an overseas setting, I have tried to stay out of it and submit no matter how I felt. I must now speak up. I have not found sufficient biblical backing to satisfy me concerning the actions to discommunicate certain leaders. Jack Harris, Ron Jones, Peter Edwards, Ron Simpkins, and any who associate with them, who have chosen for various reasons to break away. There has been time for me to retrospect and view this in light of my personal Christian and ministerial ethic, scriptural reasons for total disassociation from fellowship, moral justification. I cannot agree with the way these men have been disassociated from all relationship with fellowship ministers, their character attacked, families and friends separated and fighting. I understand loyalty and commitment. I'm aware some who broke away have been moved by wrong and divisive spirits, but we are not dealing with young converts in a local church, rather with men of God who have years of proven and fruitful ministries. There must be a difference in handling them than just simply saying, he's a rebel. My Christian spirit and beliefs cannot allow me to treat fellow ministers of the gospel that way. I cannot just cut these men off as though I never had any relationship with them. Jack Harris has spent years helping every man in this fellowship. He has been an encouragement and a partner in ministry to me. I know of no biblical, doctrinal, or moral reason why I should not associate with him. Ron Jones has been called a rebel, immoral, power-hungry, church splitter, liar, and much more. I cannot accept that. I see no biblical stand to disassociate myself or ministry from him. Ron Simpkins is a personal friend of mine. I have no biblical reason to break relationship with him or not allow him in my pulpit. Peter Edwards, I believe Peter to be a man of integrity. One of the main accusations against him was that he chose not to abide by a rule which required him to break relationship with a relative and friend many years. I can't imagine what would happen if the fellowship would draw me into a conflict with my own brother, my father, or my son, as I have seen happen this past year with some families. Structure is not divine. It is human and flawed at best. It must always be flexible to adjust with growth, maturity, and circumstances. It must become large and flexible to allow for mature men to exercise their personal visions. It must allow for complete release at some point in a man's maturity and fruitfulness. What drew me to the Arizona Fellowship 13 years ago was the vision to invest in men and see them fulfill their destiny. Planting churches was the means to release them. Now planting churches has become the process whereby men are used to build the fellowship. The worker becomes expendable. The work becomes more important than the worker. The investment is in the equipment, cars, and buildings. The indigenous church has become the fellowship church. I am no longer the 27-year-old young man who sat across from Pastor Mitchell when he offered to help me establish a church. I am 40 years old and have a much larger vision and a driving desire to see that come about in the next 10 to 20 years. With the actions that have been taken against men in the past year or so, I begin to wonder if the structure is not becoming a threat more than a help and an assistance. If a man's vision is to step into new areas of ministry, enlargement, or if he does not fully agree and submit to every letter of the law, he might find himself cut off and blackballed from all he helped build for years. That is very difficult to live with, commit to, and continue to sacrifice for. Larry Reed is an example of this. For 20 years he helped build this fellowship, labored, and had a positive impact. I had Larry and his family in my church for 2 years, and I know of nothing morally or biblically wrong with him any more than many men of feet of clay. Here is a man over 60 years old, out. In all of my Christian life, I have never seen a church or organization cut men off like that. Out of respect for the leadership of our fellowship, I have abided by the decision towards Larry. That kind of submission and discipline I now bring into question. I understand the need for disciplinary action in moral issues, even in relational ethic violations. But all discipline should be for reconciliation. I believe there should be a healing sought. That process must start with headship and the elders. I am not saying there can or will be reconciliation. We cannot go back to where we were, but there can be healing in relationships. Ungrounded accusations can be checked. A way can be paved for Christian families and friends to once again share Christian love and relationship. My personal vision has always been world evangelism. I was involved in miracle crusades and conferences in nations of the world before I came to Prescott. This vision is why I have given years of my life to missions. Now, after 8 years in missions with the fellowship, I have come to the conclusion that I cannot fulfill my missionary vision within the structure of the fellowship. 1 Corinthians 9 verse 9. For it is written in the law of Moses, Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out of the corn. The way we are structured, no matter how fruitful a missionary is, how large his church is, or how long he has been on the field, he will have generally the same amount of resources as a pioneer. I have had basically the same amount of support for 8 years in Asia. I have promoted crusades for most every pastor who comes to Asia. Yet I have never been able to preach one crusade which required me more than a few $100 investment, because I have no resources. The heartbreaking thing is that I foresee no means in the context of the fellowship which will allow us to make impact upon Asia or have resources to do any more. A number of times I have brought this up to Pastor Mitchell and some of the leadership. I have been told that the only way I can ever have resources beyond basic support is to return to the States or another developed country and build a base like other men have done. Because of my burden for Asia, I have not done that, but stayed here functioning under our structure. I always believed that by helping build the fellowship, I was also building a base which would release me, but that has not proven to be true. Recently, God reaffirmed a promise given to me years ago, that I can see powerful miracle crusades and make impact in Asia. I am now going to believe God to raise up a missionary ministry that will service this purpose. This means I am going to step out by faith for the finances needed to respond to the opportunities in Asia. This will require that I move beyond the boundaries and limitations set by the fellowship and open the door for other churches, ministries, and individuals to partner with us in ministry. I am releasing Pastor Mitchell and the Prescott Church from their commitment to support me in missionary work. I will not send a budget to the Prescott Church after October 1990. I am also resigning from the position of elder in the Christian Fellowship Ministries. Yours in Christ, Larry Neville, Singapore. Larry Neville's letter makes several specific claims. First, it argues that the disassociation of named leaders was not sufficiently grounded in Scripture. That is the letter's starting point. Neville does not deny the importance of loyalty, discipline, or order. his argument is narrower and more precise. He says he could not find adequate biblical justification for the level of separation being imposed. Second, the letter identifies relational enforcement as a central issue. Neville objects not only to formal separation from certain leaders, but to the wider expectation that ministers must sever personal and ministerial ties with them. He also describes families and friendships being divided by these conflicts. That point is significant because later reporting by Charisma magazine describes similar fallout, including targeting after departure, divided families, and broken relationships. Third, the letter raises the issue of reputational discipline. Neville refers to the way some departing leaders had been characterized and makes clear that he did not accept those characterizations at face value. In practical terms, that suggests a system in which disagreement could quickly become moral suspicion. Fourth, the letter distinguishes between spiritual authority and institutional structure. Neville writes, "Structure is not divine. It is human and flawed at best." That sentence is one of the most important lines in the document, because it reframes the conflict. The issue is not whether churches need structure, the issue is whether a particular structure had become so protected that challenging it was treated as disloyalty. That concern is relevant in light of later reporting, where Mitchell described the earlier split as an assault on our structure. Fifth, the letter argues that the fellowship had shifted from developing workers to preserving the institution. Neville says that what originally drew him to the Arizona Fellowship was the vision of investing in men and releasing them into ministry, but that church planting had become a process by which men were used to build the fellowship. That is a structural critique, not a personal grievance. He is arguing that the organization had ceased to function primarily as a means and had begun to function as an end. Sixth, the missions section is important because it shows that Neville's concerns were not limited to personal relationships. He says the fellowship's structure constrained missionary vision, funding, and long-term impact in Asia. Later reporting supports the broader context here. In 2001, Neville was quoted as saying that there has once been a move of God in the Potter's House, but that the movement had later moved into isolationism, and that some leaders wanted a larger expression of the faith as the movement matured. At that point, the letter becomes more than a disagreement over specific disciplinary decisions. It becomes a critique of the operating model itself, how authority was exercised, how relationships were managed, how dissent was framed, and whether mature ministers were allowed meaningful scope once they outgrew the narrow boundaries of the system. That is what makes this letter relevant to the discussion whether or not the Potter's House is a cult. By itself, the letter does not prove every allegation that has later been made about the Christian Fellowship Ministries, but it does provide contemporaneous evidence that an insider with standing in the movement was already identifying several features commonly examined in high-control religious systems: pressure to sever relationships, concentration of authority, reputational punishment, structural inflexibility, and institutional demands overriding conscience and calling. Those concerns also align with the movement's later public critics, and with later accounts of unhealthy control reported by Charisma magazine. The value of this document is not that it settles the discussion by itself. Its value is that it records in real time how a senior insider described the system as he was experiencing it. Larry Neville's letter shows that serious objections to Christian Fellowship Ministries were not only being made later by former members looking back, they were being made at the time by people inside the structure in response to specific disciplinary practices. That is why this letter deserves close attention, and that is why it is a useful starting point for this series. If you want this series to continue, subscribe and leave a comment. In the next episodes, I want to examine more letters and internal material the same way. Document first, analysis second. Because if this discussion is going to be useful, it has to stay evidence-led.